Title: A millionaire pretend to be paralyzed to test his wife. But what she did was shocking. Jonathan Marshall, a self-made millionaire, had it all: wealth, power, and the love of his beautiful wife, Emily. But beneath his grand fortune, Jonathan harbored deep insecurities about the loyalty of those around him, including his wife. One fateful day, he decided to fake his paralysis, to test the woman he thought loved him unconditionally. Little did he know that Emily's reaction would leave him questioning everything he believed in. Jonathan Marshall was a man who had built his empire from nothing. Coming from a working-class family, he worked tirelessly to create his multi-million-dollar company, Marshall Enterprises, which dealt in real estate, construction, and technology. Despite his success, Jonathan carried with him the scars of betrayal. Past relationships had failed him, and he had been taken advantage of for his wealth. His cynical nature made it hard for him to trust anyone, especially when money was involved. Emily was the love of his life. She was beautiful, kind, and intelligent, a woman he believed he could spend forever with. They had met at a charity event, where she was volunteering. She wasn't after his money, or so he thought. For 3 years, they had what appeared to be a perfect marriage. They lived in a lavish mansion, traveled the world together, and dined at the finest restaurants. However, deep down, Jonathan still doubted her intentions. He wondered if she would still love him if his wealth and health were stripped away. One day, Jonathan decided to stage an elaborate test, one that would reveal Emily's true character. He would fake being paralyzed. The plan was simple: an orchestrated car accident that would leave him confined to a wheelchair for life. He knew the idea was extreme, but his mind was set. He needed to know if Emily loved him for who he truly was, or for his money and status. What he didn't anticipate, however, was the shocking chain of events that would follow. Jonathan had a trusted friend and doctor, Dr. Charles Reynolds, who agreed to assist him in executing his plan. Dr. Reynolds had been his physician for years and, though skeptical of the idea, he understood Jonathan's paranoia and agreed to help. After an intense discussion, they set everything in motion. One morning, Jonathan left for what Emily believed was an important business meeting. On his way back home, Jonathan pretended to lose control of his car, crashing into a tree. He immediately contacted Dr. Reynolds, who arranged for an ambulance to transport Jonathan to the hospital. When Emily arrived, she found her husband lying in a hospital bed, his face pale and covered in bruises. Dr. Reynolds broke the devastating news: Jonathan was paralyzed from the waist down, with little hope of recovery. Emily's face turned ashen, but she stood strong, clutching Jonathan's hand. "It doesn't matter, darling," she whispered. "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Jonathan, though outwardly devastated, was secretly observing her reactions. For the first few weeks, Emily seemed devoted. She catered to his every need, feeding him, helping him with his therapy, and spending long hours by his side. Jonathan was reassured, but he knew that true tests of love often took time to reveal themselves. As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan's condition remained unchanged. He stayed confined to his wheelchair, pretending to suffer from intense depression and physical limitations. The burden of caring for him had visibly begun to take a toll on Emily. Jonathan noticed her growing frustration. She started missing therapy sessions, hiring a nurse to help with his care. At first, Jonathan dismissed it as exhaustion, but over time, her absences became more frequent, and her behavior more distant. One evening, Jonathan overheard Emily on the phone. Her voice was cold, almost indifferent. Yes, he's still the same. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she said, her tone filled with frustration. Jonathan's heart sank. Was this the beginning of the end? Emily's behavior continued to shift. She started spending more time away from home, often returning late at night. When Jonathan asked where she had been, her answers were vague. Just out with friends, she would say, her eyes avoiding his. Jonathan's suspicions grew. One night, while Emily was out, Jonathan decided to investigate. He had the nurse help him into his study, where he accessed the security cameras in their mansion. He watched hours of footage, but it wasn't until 2 days prior that he saw something that shocked him. Emily had returned home late, accompanied by a man. Jonathan rewound the footage and watched again in disbelief. The man was a well-known business associate of his, Richard Davies, a wealthy entrepreneur with whom he had worked closely. Jonathan's chest tightened as he watched Emily and Richard disappear into the guest house, their body language intimate. Jonathan felt sick to his core. His worst fears had come true. The woman he loved, the woman he had tested, was betraying him. But instead of confronting her, Jonathan decided to wait, to gather more evidence of her treachery. He couldn't believe how easily she had succumbed to temptation once she thought he was helpless. In the following weeks, Jonathan observed Emily's betrayal unfold before his eyes. She was spending more and more time with Richard, even when she thought Jonathan was asleep. She would leave the house for days at a time, claiming she was with friends, when in reality, she was with Richard, plotting their future together. Jonathan became consumed by rage and heartbreak. He couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. One evening, while Emily was out again, Jonathan decided to confront Richard instead. He invited Richard to the mansion under the pretense of discussing business. When Richard arrived, Jonathan pretended to be the same helpless, paralyzed man he had been for months. But as Richard sat across from him, Jonathan's demeanor changed. "You think I don't know, Richard?" Jonathan's voice was cold, cutting through the tension in the room. Richard looked startled. "Know what, Jonathan?" "I know about you and Emily," Jonathan hissed, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen everything." Richard's face paled. "It's not what you think, Jonathan. Don't lie to me." Jonathan snapped. "I trusted you, and you betrayed me." There was silence for a moment before Richard's expression changed. He leaned back, his face smug. "And what are you going to do about it, Jonathan? You're in a wheelchair. You can't do anything." Jonathan's eyes darkened. He slowly stood up from his wheelchair, his posture straight and intimidating. Richard's eyes widened in shock as Jonathan walked toward him. "What the? You can walk?" Richard stammered, stumbling back in disbelief. "Yes," Jonathan growled. "And now, you're going to pay for what you've done." Before Richard could react, Jonathan lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. "You're going to tell me everything," Jonathan demanded. "How long has this been going on?" Richard, now terrified, stammered, "It's been a few months. She came to me after the accident. She said she couldn't handle it anymore. We've been seeing each other behind your back, but I swear it wasn't supposed to go this far." Jonathan released him, his fists trembling with fury. "Get out," he whispered. "Get out before I do something I regret." Richard bolted from the mansion, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts. His heart raced as he considered his next move. Emily would be home soon, and he needed to confront her. He needed to know why she had done this to him. That night, Emily returned home, her expression cheerful as she greeted Jonathan. But Jonathan's face was cold, his eyes full of contempt. "Where were you?" Jonathan asked, his voice eerily calm. Emily hesitated, then forced a smile. "I was out with some friends." "Why do you ask?" Jonathan stood up from his wheelchair, the sudden movement shocking Emily. Her face drained of color as she watched him take a step toward her. "You're walking," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan's eyes burned with anger. "I've been able to walk this entire time, Emily. I've been watching you. Watching everything." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "Jonathan, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Jonathan interrupted. "You betrayed me, Emily. You lied to me. You've been seeing Richard behind my back for months, and I know everything." Emily's face crumbled, and tears welled in her eyes. "Jonathan, please." "Why, Emily?" Jonathan's voice cracked with emotion. "Why would you do this to me? After everything we've been through?" Emily sobbed, collapsing onto the floor. "I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. I didn't know if I could handle taking care of you forever. I was scared, Jonathan. Scared that our life would never be the same." Jonathan stared at her, his heart shattered. "You didn't think you could handle it? So you turned to another man instead?" Emily wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "I was weak. I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you, Jonathan. I never meant for it to go this far." Jonathan shook his head, unable to comprehend her betrayal. "I trusted you, Emily. I loved you more than anything, and you threw it all away." Emily reached out to him, but Jonathan pulled away. "It's too late, Emily. I can't forgive you for this." In the days that followed, Jonathan filed for divorce. Emily pleaded with him, begged him to reconsider, but Jonathan's heart had turned cold. He couldn't bear to be with someone who had betrayed him so deeply. The mansion that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt empty and hollow. Emily left, and Jonathan was left alone, but his soul was no longer at peace. Though he had exposed her treachery, the victory felt hollow. He had tested her, and she had failed, but in doing so, he had also lost himself. His insecurities and mistrust had driven him to create a situation that destroyed the very thing he had tried to protect. Jonathan continued his life as a millionaire, but the emptiness lingered. He had learned a harsh lesson: testing love can reveal the truth, but sometimes the truth is far more painful than the lie. And in the end, Jonathan realized that some things are better left unknown. Jonathan's elaborate test led to the ultimate betrayal, but it also showed the fragility of human relationships. He learned that love cannot be tested with deception, and trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. The tragedy of his tale lay not only in Emily's actions but also in his own inability to trust the love he had. The haunting question that remained was whether the test was truly necessary, or if his doubts had poisoned the relationship long before the truth was revealed. The end. In the heart of a wealthy family, two brothers stood at the reading of their late father's will. One brother, Maxwell, was already a millionaire, and his inheritance reflected his success. The other brother, Daniel, was given nothing but the keys to an old, dilapidated car sitting in their father's forgotten garage. Maxwell laughed, mocking his brother's meager inheritance. But 2 years later, the tables would turn in a way that left everyone stunned, proving that some inheritances are far more valuable than gold. Title: A millionaire laughed at his brother who inherited only an abandoned car from their father. 2 years later, everyone was left speechless. The Sutton brothers couldn't be more different. Maxwell, the elder by 5 years, was the golden child. He followed in their father Gregory Sutton's footsteps, taking over the family's lucrative real estate business and turning it into a vast empire. Wealthy, confident, and admired, Maxwell had lived his entire life in the lap of luxury. He was a fixture in high society, rubbing elbows with the elite, and was known for his sharp business acumen and ruthlessness in deals. Daniel, the younger brother, had always been a quiet, contemplative soul. He was an artist at heart, though he never found much commercial success. He spent his time painting landscapes and portraits, always seeking beauty in the ordinary. While his family supported him to some degree, he often felt like an outcast, living in the shadow of Maxwell's achievements. Their father, Gregory Sutton, had been a man of vast wealth and influence, but he was also a man of wisdom. In his final years, he grew weary of Maxwell's arrogance and Daniel's quiet acceptance of his status. He wanted to teach both of his sons a final lesson, one they would never forget. At the reading of Gregory's will, tensions were high. Maxwell was smug, expecting to receive the lion's share of their father's wealth. Daniel, on the other hand, sat quietly in the corner, not expecting much but grateful for whatever small gesture his father might leave him. When the lawyer began reading, the room fell silent. To my eldest son, Maxwell, I leave the remainder of my real estate empire, my investments, and the family mansion. May it serve you as well as it served me. Maxwell smiled, satisfied with his substantial inheritance. He glanced over at Daniel, certain his brother would receive little more than a token amount. But then, the lawyer continued, to my youngest son, Daniel, I leave my old car, a 1967 Mustang, located in the family's estate garage. It has not been driven in decades. My wish is that Daniel finds value in it, as I once did. Maxwell erupted in laughter. A car? That's it? Father gave you an old piece of junk? This is too much, he jeered, his laughter filling the room. Daniel said nothing, accepting the car keys quietly. He didn't argue or question the will. His heart sank, but he chose not to show it. He loved his father and trusted that there was meaning behind this seemingly trivial inheritance, though he couldn't see it yet. Maxwell's laughter echoed long after the will was read, but Daniel simply pocketed the keys and left without a word. In his mind, he resolved to at least see the car his father left him. Weeks passed before Daniel finally made his way to the family estate to inspect the car. Tucked away in the corner of the dusty garage was the 1967 Mustang. It was covered in grime and rust, looking more like a relic than a treasure. Its tires were deflated, and its once shiny coat of paint was faded and cracked. Maxwell's words echoed in Daniel's head, but he dismissed them, knowing there was something more to this. Daniel spent hours cleaning the car. As he wiped away the dust and dirt, memories of his father flooded his mind. He remembered how Gregory used to take the Mustang out on long drives when Daniel was a child, telling him that the car was his greatest prize, not for its material value, but for the memories it held. His father had always been a man of sentiment, and now Daniel began to understand. One day, as Daniel worked on the car, he discovered something hidden beneath the driver's seat, a small, leather-bound journal. It was his father's. As he flipped through the pages, Daniel realized it was filled with letters, notes, and sketches that his father had written over the years. Gregory had detailed moments from his life that he had never shared with his sons, his dreams, his regrets, and his fears about the legacy he was leaving behind. There was one particular entry that caught Daniel's eye. It was dated just 2 years before Gregory's passing. The documentary, titled A Father's Legacy, followed Daniel's restoration process and his emotional journey as he uncovered more about his father's life and values. It became an unexpected hit, drawing attention from people all over the country. Meanwhile, Maxwell continued to bask in his wealth and success, oblivious to his brother's rising fame. He scoffed at the idea of a documentary about an old car, believing it would amount to nothing. But as the months passed, Daniel's story became more and more well-known. The documentary gained critical acclaim, winning awards at film festivals and even earning Daniel invitations to speak about his father's legacy and the lessons he had learned through the restoration of the Mustang. Maxwell, on the other hand, began to face difficulties in his business. A series of bad investments and legal troubles chipped away at his fortune, and the public's growing fascination with Daniel's story only added to his frustration. Maxwell, once untouchable in the business world, 2 years after the reading of the will, Daniel's restored Mustang was unveiled at a major car show, where it won first place for its historical significance and immaculate restoration. The car had become a symbol of perseverance, family, and the importance of values over material wealth. As Daniel stood on stage, accepting the award, the audience gave him a standing ovation. His heart swelled with pride, not for the car itself, but for what it represented, the lessons his father had passed on to him. Maxwell, who had come to the car show out of curiosity, stood in the back, watching in disbelief. His once dismissed brother was now a celebrated figure, admired for his humility, hard work, and dedication to family. The wealth that Maxwell had once flaunted now seemed insignificant in comparison to the respect and love Daniel had earned. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt a deep sense of regret. His riches had not brought him happiness, and his arrogance had driven a wedge between him and the people who truly mattered. He realized that his father had left him wealth, but had left Daniel something far more valuable, wisdom. As Daniel stepped down from the stage, he saw Maxwell standing alone, looking lost. Without hesitation, Daniel approached his brother, offering him a smile. "You did well, Danny," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks, Max," Daniel replied, his heart softening. In that moment, the years of rivalry and bitterness began to fade. The brothers stood together, united not by wealth, but by the bond of family that their father had always wanted them to cherish. In the end, it wasn't the money or the possessions that defined the Sutton brothers, it was the lessons they learned from their father. Maxwell, humbled by his experiences, slowly began to rebuild his life, focusing less on material wealth and more on building meaningful relationships. He and Daniel repaired their once strained bond, spending more time together and learning to appreciate the different paths they had taken. Daniel, now a respected figure in the community and beyond, continued to live simply, using his newfound platform to advocate for the values his father had instilled in him: humility, kindness, and the importance of family. The Mustang, once a forgotten relic, now stood as a symbol of those lessons, a reminder that some inheritances are far more valuable than money. And as the years passed, everyone who had once laughed at Daniel's inheritance was left speechless, realizing that what he had gained was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The story of the Sutton brothers is a tale of transformation, of learning that wealth is not the measure of a man's worth, and that sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is the wisdom to understand what truly matters. In the end, the millionaire's laughter turned into admiration, as everyone realized that Daniel's humble inheritance had changed not only his life but the lives of those around him. And it all started with an old car, a father's love, and a lesson that no amount of money could buy. The end.